Leadership is about facing the unknown. It's about making decisions when there's no certainty. And sometimes it's about taking a leap of faith even when the path isn't clear. In today's episode, we sit down with Abid Adam, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer from Axiata Group.
But I was always curious is, can you lead in a completely unknown environment?
Yeah.
And so from a professional standoff and personal standoff point of view, I felt that I wanted to grow as a human being.
Leadership isn't just about growth, it's also about managing risk. Abid reminds us that with every decision, whether personal or professional, comes with three important questions.
So what's the upside? And that's quite easy when a business wants to grow because there's an element of optimism bias.
Yeah.
The second question that I always ask is, what's the downside? A lot of people will do risk analysis in, of course, any transaction or investments that they want to undertake. But the third question that many people don't take time to deliberate and, more importantly, walk away from is, what's the downside we cannot live with?
With growth comes responsibility. Leaders today face the challenge of balancing innovation with ethics. Abid talks about the importance of doing business the right way, because real success is built on trust. We hope today's podcast leaves you with new perspectives on the choices we make, the risks we take, and the paths we choose to lead. Welcome to the AIBP ASEAN B2B Growth Podcast.
The AIBP ASEAN B2B Growth Podcast is a series of fireside chats with business leaders in Southeast Asia focused on growth in the region. Topics discussed include business strategy, sales and marketing, enterprise technology, and innovation.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Today we have actually a very interesting individual who is a guest on our podcast. I will leave him to introduce himself, but before we do that, as you are probably aware, we have a lot of different episodes with different leaders in Southeast Asia who are driving growth within their organizations. What we found recently is actually an interesting point. There has been a lot of leaders who are actually starting to shift their careers into Southeast Asia, who were not probably natively born and raised in this part of the world. And today's guest is an example of that. So I'll leave him to introduce himself, maybe just give a quick overview of who you are and how you came to, we are recording this out of Malaysia, how you came to Malaysia.
Sure. So good morning and hello to all your listeners. My name is Abid Adam. I am Axiata Group Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. It's a very interesting journey. I came to Malaysia about just over 6.5, close to now perhaps 7 years. My journey is quite interesting because I started largely in financial services, leading large-scale digital, cybersecurity, risk management, transformation projects. About 7 years ago, Axiata was transforming its capabilities and largely pivoting towards digital first, advancing Asia, not just Malaysia. I think that's the purpose still remains, and to become a next generation digital champion. At that part, the board sort of had reflections on things that they want to improve and enhance capabilities on. So the board was very visionary 7 to 8 years ago. They thought cybersecurity is going to be something very important in the future. And therefore, I was the introduction to the organization to lead the cybersecurity program, the transformation program across Southeast Asia. So that's been sort of the genesis of my journey in Axiata. And of course, I've been with Axiata from the beginning till here. So very happy in terms of the progress that they have made. My personal, of course, transformation has also evolved where I started with leading the cybersecurity transformation initiatives, and then 2 or 3 years down the track, data privacy came across as a very important topic. So board asked to evolve on those sort of things, and I led that project. And then just before COVID, I took on the enterprise risk management and then also the broader compliance, ethics, integrity. So in Malaysia, example, with the introduction of MACC Section 17A Act that came along to ensure that Axiata was ready and its operating companies were ready to be compliant with MACC requirements, but even more broader in terms of how we start looking at being more progressive, because it's an area that we believe we can truly contribute to. And now if you look at it, is in relation to ESG, especially the S and a G part, is heavily towards being a good corporate and leading by ensuring that the businesses we do and the customers we interact with, we do it with integrity. And so I think that's also a key essence. So I have quite a broad portfolio in terms of what I do and what I looked at. And so that's
Yeah,
been the
thanks,
background.
Abid. I think a question that everybody wants to know, especially when we have guests on our podcast, is effectively tell us a little bit about your career trajectory, because you didn't grow up in Malaysia. You grew up, I believe, in South Africa.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit, and you came from a financial services background as well. Tell us a little bit about your career trajectory over the last, I would say, since you started into now.
I think it's an interesting one. When I started very early on, I always had this curious mindset. And back then, cybersecurity was not even in the picture when I started. In fact, when I used to tell people I do cybersecurity, or back then it was called IT security, they used to ask me, what is that? But it so happened that as businesses evolved and started moving towards transforming their core products and services, providing it onto multiple omni-channel capabilities, digitization, cloud, all of that has layered on top. So then cybersecurity became very, very important. And therefore, of course, my role, even in South Africa, evolved from purely providing technical capabilities and services to being a business leader, evolving towards more risk management side of things. And so I worked, even in banking, I was fortunate enough to work across middle office, back office, supporting the front office, both on investment banking side and also on the retail side. So I had quite a broad sort of exposure. And then I saw when I was in the banking, then I always had this need to learn further and on the business side. So then I started working for one of the largest insurance and wealth management and asset management companies. And so I had this huge then background that's from retail, investment banking, insurance, asset management, wealth management. And what I found ironic is when I was in the financial services, one of the things 7-8 years ago was telcos are eating our lunch. They always felt that telco had the touch point with the customer. Telco is. So I was always curious, and I was like, so and it so happened Axiata then on the journey we sort of met up, and then it sort of became natural transition. Two things why I sort of specifically selected to be with Axiata. One was my curiosity of this telco and why the business always felt in financial services that telco is the future. A lot of the products and services will be delivered through telcos. And so I thought, well, that seems like the natural next step from an industry perspective. Yeah. The second was, I had some exposure to Asia markets, even Europe and so forth, but I didn't really lived and worked in Asia. So large part of, because I've managed teams even within Africa in multiple countries and so forth, but I was always curious is, can you lead in a completely unknown environment? Yeah. And so from a professional standoff and personal standoff point of view, I felt that I wanted to grow as a human being. When this opportunity knocked on the door, I still remember very clearly our head of HR said, Abid, why don't you come over with your family to come and visit Malaysia? Because prior to that, I know the country Malaysia, family has come for holiday, but I personally didn't come to Malaysia. Okay. I didn't even know what Malaysia looked like.
And this was 2016?
2017.
2017, okay.
And so the head of HR said, Abid, why don't you come over, come with your family, spend a week, have a look at the country and see what you feel, and if you enjoy it, then for sure come join us. So I thought about it, and I remember having this conversation with my wife and said, to judge any country in 5 days or 7 days, I think it's really premature. Yeah. Because you will never get the true essence of what the country is. So like for the first 6 months, I always believe that whatever experiences you had, you should never judge any country. After that, of course, after 1 year, if you still have negative feelings about it, then you may want to reconsider your decision. So I actually remember calling up back and said, no, I don't need familiarization trip. I just told my wife, let's pack up everything and go. And everybody thought I was crazy. Like, never seen a country, never visited the country, doesn't even know what it looks like. And then you're suddenly taking out young kids, 3 young girls. So say taking everybody to Malaysia. And I said, yes, take a leap of faith. And so 7 years down the line, I don't regret making that decision at all. It has been an incredible journey, both on a personal level and a professional level.
Fantastic. That's a fantastic story. So effectively, you're Malaysian now, right? You spent 7 years here. You understand all the different foods you have at the hawker center that you can, and you are obviously, because you've been in Malaysia, Malaysia obviously has the better food than Singapore, right? You're supposed to say that.
Yeah. Well, we've been fortunate because Axiata has direct and indirect operations in many of Asia, Southeast Asia primarily, but we have businesses that also operate in likes of Japan and so forth, or partnerships with large conglomerates on that side of the world. So I've been personally very fortunate to be exposed to many countries and cultures, and each country has its very unique way of doing things, both at a corporate level, personal level, the cultures, decision making, and so forth. And of course, food is, I've picked up 15 kilos. So whoever's seen me from South Africa. 15
kilos in 7 years, that's
so,
a good...
it's been 2 kilos and now I'm trying to maintain that, so it has its definitely positives and you have
downsides too, right?
Yeah.
Going back to that, you mentioned the whole idea around decision making and how, you decided that this is not something you can experience in 5 days or 6 days or even 7 days. So it's a leap of faith. And I think that's the way a lot of companies, corporates in this part of the world, that's what they're struggling with today in highly regulated environments, or even you've been in banking and you're in the telco space. These are 2 very regulated industries. When it comes to innovation and taking the leap of faith, culturally or even within specific industries, it makes it a little bit harder, right? What has been your experience, especially since you hold the title of Chief Risk Officer, in managing the risk aspects of growth or the risk aspects of trying something different?
I feel that in anything in life, if you want to achieve, anything worthwhile achieving, anything in terms of a audacious goal you want to achieve, there will always be an element of risk. Whether it's Axiata or, like I said, I took a leap of faith in a personal journey too. As a chief risk officer, the way I kind of look at it is you go through a thought process. You go through very clearly steps and approach where you identify what are the top risks that your organization will need to navigate through. Secondly, you sit down with the right management level and you ask 3 questions, because what mostly happens in many situations or circumstances, especially with business leaders, if you look at Axiata's history, we have been growing through massive transformation across multiple asset portfolio, and we have done a lot of mergers. In the last 10 years, there are a lot of companies, big size, over $1 billion to smaller size. There's been scale of investments we have made across Asia and Southeast Asia. And there are always 3 questions that I personally ask. What's the upside? And that's quite easy when a business wants to grow, because there's an element of optimism bias.
Yeah. Yes.
So there's nothing wrong with that. As an entrepreneur, you have to have a lot of optimism. Otherwise, you would not do anything. Yeah. The second question that I always ask is, what's the downside? Now, a lot of people will do risk analysis in, of course, any transaction or investments that they want to undertake. But the third question that many people don't take time to deliberate and, more importantly, walk away from is, what's the downside we cannot live with? Because there's a big difference.
Yeah.
And very few people that are on this view of what's the downside they cannot live with. And those who actually take time to have that question answered and then stick to the decision. And sometimes it's very, very hard, because the upside at the moment in time feels overwhelmingly in the direction that you want to hit. although the signal says that the downside you cannot live with, the red line that you have drawn, it's crossing that. So I think the risk management is not really about technical per se. I mean, at the Axiata example, we have defined for each of the risk categories, whether it's financial, whether it's ESG, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's financial, certain things that the board feels it's our tolerance or risk appetite thresholds. And within that thresholds, upper bound or lower bound, we're willing to operate. But, like example, on anti-bribery and corruption, we said we have zero tolerance for corrupt activities. So no matter how good the business opportunity is, if the business case dictates otherwise, we will not take the decision itself. So I think it's good that when any organization ventures out into unknown, is to know thyself, is to know what is that downside that they cannot live with. And most importantly is to then ensure that it's embedded in your decision-making process throughout the life cycle itself. Whether it's in a business planning, whether it's an acquisition, whether it's a new product or services, whether it's divestiture, anything you do, it's about baking that into your BAU process. I think that if you can build that ethos, that framework on risk management, decision making, I think it will help you navigate. And of course, even with going through all of that, life is never a straight line trajectory. And so one of the important things is when you go through sort of a moment of lesson learned, is how do you reflect as an individual, as a company, and how do you then bake it back into your decision-making process, because you're now become a little bit more wiser.
I'd like to go a little bit deeper into that. So this whole idea around data is a new goal. I think we've seen this, especially with technology coming to the forefront in large enterprises. And you mentioned certain things that I'd like to expand on. So the red line, the thresholds. Sure, we have standard things that the company will look at fundamentally. It's baked into maybe the core culture or even the DNA of the firm. But the way things are moving, I'm sure there are certain data points or certain specific metrics or frameworks that you are keeping an eye on quite closely. Let's say it might be temporary for the next 3 months, for the next 6 months. Over the last year or so, can you maybe talk about which specific metrics or which specific benchmarks you've been watching that's been keeping you up at night?
Well, I think, again, as I say, we have at Axiata 13 risk categories. Those 13 risk categories, each one of them has very specific metrics. So, example, on financial, we would use debt to EBITDA. Okay, because we want to, given the macroeconomic developments, especially in some of the frontier and non-frontier markets, we believe we will be more resilient if we deleverage our balance sheet. So debt to EBITDA, and there are certain thresholds that we have set up, is a key metric that we look at. On a financial side, of course, there's other PATAMI and so forth that we communicate to the market and we keep very close eye on. But then there are other metrics which are not as binary as maybe what's your top line, bottom line, profitability, and so forth. They are qualitative in nature, but it still has a material impact on our organization. Things like onslaught of new regulations. We keep very close on that. Things like geopolitical developments. We keep very close eye on that, because if you look at what just happened in Bangladesh, we have a large operations in Bangladesh. More than 50% of the world's population this year is going to go and vote. And therefore, the outcome of some of those elections directly impact us, because we're operating a lot of those markets in Asia itself. And of course, if you look at what most probably will transpire in US in November, we have to be ready for that too as an organization. So there are metrics that keeps us awake, which are not financial in nature, but we know it has a downstream impact to us should they materialize. Then, of course, I think like ESG, we have very specific metrics we keep track of, because we have committed what our net zero targets are, what we want to achieve by 2030, what we want to by 2050. So for all the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 on ESG, to make sure that we deliver on that, because we don't want to, and one of the things we keep real eye on is an execution risk. We certainly also don't want to be tainted for any greenwashing risk. So how do we ensure that we spend right time, what we communicate to the markets, the data quality, and then of course the challenge you have is the varied maturity in different markets we operate. Bangladesh is not Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka is not Cambodia, Cambodia is not Malaysia, Malaysia is not Indonesia. And so how do you ensure that there is an element of harmonization in understanding what we want to communicate? Some of the standards are still evolving, even from ESG, it's still very new. So making sure that we're comparing apples with apples, and when we're communicating to our stakeholders, we are confident in our reporting. And so I think, each of cybersecurity, again, we over 150 million customers depend on us. And when you make a phone call or when you buy our digital products or services, whether it's in digital financial services like Boost Payment or now with the launch of the bank, you expect and demand of us that those transactions and that phone conversation is secure, that nobody is listening to it, it's not tampered with. Yeah. And therefore, we take that responsibility very seriously. So when it comes to things like cybersecurity, we have very specific metrics, things like mean time to detect. Because again, in cybersecurity, we are of the view that no matter how much any company invests, you will get breached if it is a nation state actor after you. So then the question really is about, it's not a matter of if, it's the matter of when. And when it happens to you, how quickly do you respond? And first of all, how quickly you have detected it, how quickly then you respond. And so the metrics like MTTD, which mean time to detect, and MTTR, mean time to respond, we keep very close eye on it. We keep close eye on things like patch cycle. How quickly can you patch some of the vulnerabilities that, whether it's Microsoft or other products, when there's vulnerabilities on that, and we have that in our estate, what's the remediation time frame on that? So I think on people, talent is, whether it is on digital side or other core areas like even ESG, there's a shortage of good talent. Yeah. And therefore, things like attrition rate, things like succession planning, things like ensuring that we have a clear understanding of our key core capabilities we want to grow the people in, so life of people. I think those are some of the metrics we look at in people side. So we have a very clear 13 or 11 categories, and within 11 categories we have sub-categories and specific metrics. And we report that and engage that. Occupational health and safety is another. And so lost time injury, LTIF, is another metric specific. If you're asking for metrics, what we look at. And all this is then deliberated first at the management level with the CEO and his direct reports, then with the board committee, and then directly to the board, the group board itself. And we do that both at the operating company level. So, for example, I'm Axiata's nominee on all the nominee director in all the operating companies' board committees, and then of course we report to the group level, also the group board of directors.
Sounds like a lot of things keep you up at night then. and drawing parallels to, and this is something that's happened, right? When you moved to Malaysia, I'd like to draw some personal parallels here. What was your red line? What was your red line for you and your family? Obviously, Malaysia has surpassed expectations for you. You've been here 7 years. But when you were making that decision and moving, was there a threshold? Was there a red line, especially moving a family over?
Yeah, I think it was largely a family decision because personally I have been fortunate enough to work in many different markets. I may have not lived in a country, but I've spent enough time. So, I've worked in London, I've worked in a lot of African countries. I had the opportunity to be exposed to businesses in Asia. So, for me, it was largely, and I had my kids were very, very young when I moved to Malaysia, 6 years, 5 years, and so forth. So, it was largely going to be a family decision. If the family wasn't settled, then I think it would have been something that I would have to reconsider. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I spend more than 70-80% of my time at work. I interact, and of course, I've been blessed to be afforded an opportunity to take on projects that really excited me at a large scale. So a lot of things kept me busy, a lot of traveling and so forth. When I get home, I do have a family, and they have a very different outlook to what they were going to experience. So in short, I think, work at Axiata has been fantastic. But if I had to make a decision, it would have been just, are the kids settled? And are they assimilating in the community that we live in the schools that we live in, and so forth? I think that's the key factor. Because at the end of the day, you want to ensure that it's just not about yourself, but it's about, in Africa, there's a very good word that we use called Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
Yeah.
Ubuntu.
And it basically means I am because we are.
Yeah.
And so I think that even at work, I always have that philosophy, whether it's stronger together. Because no person is able to achieve great thing on their own.
Exactly, especially nowadays. It's a bit more impossible.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've taken quite a bit of your time, but I'd like to end this with a couple of quick fire questions, if you may.
Sure.
So there'll be some questions that I'll be asking, and you can just give me your thoughts immediately. So first question is around, we understand you like books quite a bit, books and audiobooks. So on a professional capacity, this is a two-part question, right? On a professional capacity, what book do you find yourself always reaching back to, throughout your professional career? And the second question is, what's your most recent favorite read?
Yeah, I always go back to Edward de Bono's books. The one I really like is Teach Your Child How to Think. It's got a lot of both how to make decisions, but also how you apply a very systematic and structured manner in which you think about certain things. So I still have that on my desk. I mean, I've got a lot of books, but I always try to keep that way, and I go back to the process of decision making, and I have a very structured way. So I like Edward de Bono books. And then right now, I just on the way here, I was listening to also a book. It's called Mental Models. Yeah, it's on Audible. So whenever most of the time I use Audible to digest books, simply because I really don't get time to sit down and read. So I try and consume a lot of the knowledge through Audible. And I like the mental model from Audible itself, is because it also is very similar to Edward de Bono books. It's giving you different tools like first order thinking, second order thinking, which is sometimes unintended consequences, although you made good decisions, or you made good, but you didn't think about the unintended consequences that comes with it, and they explain very meticulously how you should go about doing it. So I like it. I like reading books that always empowers you to become a better leader and a better person. Largely non-fiction books. I enjoy non-fiction books itself.
Okay, fantastic. On the flip side, any recent fiction books that you like?
Oh, I have never read fiction books
you
for a
don't
very
like
long
fiction
time.
books?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just haven't read. There's so many non-fiction books I have in the list.
The list
of
is a
things
bit
I
too
want
long to
read.
get through.
Yeah.
Okay, final question of today. You've been in Malaysia for 7 years, and you've come from a background where you grew up not within this part of the region. But on a professional and on a personal capacity, what are things you're most excited about in Malaysia, in the Southeast Asian region, because you have a lot of operating companies in this part of the world, and globally as well? Personally and professionally.
Yeah, I think in a way, the both are sort of twined and linked, is the mere opportunity on certain things like digital transformation. Malaysia and broadly Southeast Asia and Asia at large is at the nascent stage, so there's a lot of room for growth, whether it's on a population adopting smarter technologies. I mean, if you look at just Malaysia, the amount of growth, investment in data centers that has happened, and these are sort of catalysts for future change because the infrastructure is only being laid out. Yes, we are reaping the benefits of foreign direct investments coming through immediately, but certainly that to me is a myopic way of looking at it. It's like when Industrial Revolution started, when people started laying out the railway tracks, they didn't think of perhaps all the other benefits, side benefits that came with it. Initially it was just transporting goods from point A to point B, but today it's movement, mobility, and so many other benefits that have come through. So I kind of think that's the era in the digital space we're moving to, even Malaysia and the markets we operate. So I'm really excited about that because I think the field we are in and the profession I personally am in is an area that's constantly evolving. Of course, with the advent of generative AI and investments in AI and the opportunity for both small businesses and individuals to have access to information and capabilities that previously a small shop around the corner, Mapak in even a kampung couldn't have. Even kampung today can have the same infrastructure facilities where a large company would have to invest millions before you can build a data center and something of that sort. So your ability to scale up and scale down, your ability to access a leading edge or cutting edge technologies, and irrespective of the part of the world you are staying in, I think to me is a very exciting opportunity. And I think if individuals and organizations and countries as whole captures that, I think they'll definitely ride on the upside, that the benefits that come to it. Of course, there are downsides on the ethical side, safety side, security side, privacy side that we need to manage, and Malaysia is trying to do that with recently enacted laws, 4 new regulations on data privacy, on cybersecurity, and of course amendment on the data privacy, to make sure that while we capture the upside, we don't in a way not think about some of the risks that comes with it. So I think it's a balancing act that one needs to do, but I certainly think we're in the right space.
So you think we're in the building phase, structurally laying the groundwork for what will come.
Yeah.
So most of the benefits will be realized or executed in some ways by the next generation, your Three Girls, for example.
Yeah, and that's true. And also the shift of heavily because every economy has to shift, and if they don't shift, then unfortunately you will not, the concept of Asian tigers was because you captured that opportunity that came within that period of time. So if you want the phase 2 of that, which is largely now moving towards digitized economy, then you have to lay out that infrastructure, you have to build it, you have to be future fit. And I think Malaysia is trying to progress towards that, and hopefully we continue on that path. So therefore, in 5 years from now, my children, your children, and a broader sort of the society itself will benefit from that.
Thank you. Abid, last question. What's your favorite Malaysian food?
Roti canai.
Roti canai. Great answer. I love it too. Again, thank you very much, Abid, for taking the time to speak with us today. A lot of interesting insights, and I'll be sure to check out. I'm actually a big fan of Edward de Bono, but I've not read Teaching Your Kids How to Think.
Yeah.
So I might
how
check
to
that
teach.
out.
My kids read it too. It's a really good book. You should have, because it basically has all the key tools that one needs to define goals, objectives. When you want to make decisions, they've got tools like PMI, plus, minus, interesting. So it allows you to have that conversation, and I use that quite even in like making a decision, where do you want to go on holiday, and you say you want to go in country A and another kid wants to go in country B, then I just do a PMI. Okay, why country A? What's the plus? What's the minus? What's interesting points? We sit down and then we compare the stuff. So it's trying to embed into your day-to-day decision making, but it's around making sure that you're not thinking in a singular direction. You have multiple viewpoints coming in, and then you make a decision.
Mental elasticity, right? Fantastic. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We hope you've enjoyed the episode. For more information about business growth in the ASEAN region, please visit our website at www.aibp.sg.